I'm aware of how this sounds, and I can well imagine the judgments you're forming. But if I'm really to explain this to you, I have no choice but to be candid. Yeah, it was a pickup, plain and simple. And she was what one might call a granola cruncher, a hippie. And she was straight out of Central Casting. The sandals, flamboyantly long hair, financial support from her parents. She reviled and some professed membership in an apostrophe-heavy Eastern religion that I would defy anyone to pronounce correctly. Look, I'll just bite the political bullet and confess that I classified her strictly as a one-night objective. And that my interest was due almost entirely to the fact that, yes, she was pretty. She was sexually attractive. She was sexy. And it was really nothing more complicated or noble than that. And having some prior dealings with the crunchier genus, I think the one-night provisio was due mostly to the grim unimaginability of having to talk with her for more than one night. Whether or not you approve, I think we can assume you understand. And there's something in the way. I mean, a near contempt. In the way that you can casually saunter over to her blanket and create a sense of connection that will allow you to pick her up. And you almost resent the fact that it's so goddamn easy. I mean, how exploitative you feel that it's so easy to get this type to regard you as a kindred soul. I mean, you almost know what it's going to be said before she even opens her mouth. Okay, so now we're in my apartment. And she begins going on about her religious views, her obscure denomination's views on energy fields and connections between souls, and what she kept calling focus. And in response to some sort of prompt or association, she begins to relate this anecdote. And in the anecdote, there she is, hitchhiking. Well, she said she knew she'd made a mistake the moment she got in the car. Her explanation was that she didn't actually feel any energy field until she had shut the car's door and they were moving, at which point it was too late. And she wasn't melodramatic about it, but she described herself as literally paralyzed with terror. And something about his eyes. She said she knew instantly, in the depths of her soul, that this man's intentions were to brutally rape, torture, and kill her. And by the time the psychotic had exited into a secluded area and actually said what his true intentions were, she wasn't the least bit surprised. Because she knew she was going to be just another grisly discovery for some amateur botanist or scout troop a few days later. Unless she could focus her way into a soul connection that would prevent this man from murdering her. I mean, to focus intently on this psychotic as an ensouled and beautiful, albeit tormented, person in his own right, rather than merely a threat to her. And well, I'm aware that what she's about to describe is nothing more than a variant of the stale old love will conquer all. But for the moment, just bracket your contempt and try to see what she actually has the courage and conviction to really attempt here. Because imagine what it must have felt like for her. For anyone. Contemplate just how little kid level scared you'd be at this psychotic could bring you to this point by simply wishing it. And now here she is in the car, and she realizing that she's in for the biggest struggle of her spiritual life. She stares directly into the psychopath's right eye and wills herself to keep her gaze directly on him at all times. And the effects of her focus, she says, that when she was able to hold focus, the psychopath behind the wheel would gradually stop ranting and become tensely silent. And she wills herself not to weep or plead, but merely to use focus as an opportunity to emphasize. And this was my first hint of sadness in listening to this anecdote, as I found myself admiring certain qualities in her story that were the same qualities I'd been contemptuous of when I first picked her up in the park. And then he asked her to get out of the car and lie prone on the ground. And she doesn't hesitate or beg. She was experiencing a whole new depth of focus. She said she could hear the tick of the car bees, birds. Imagine the temptation to despair and the sound of carefree birds on the yards from where you lay, breathing in the weeds. And in this heightened state, she said she could feel the psychotic realizing the truth of the situation at the same time she did. And when he came over to her and turned her over, he was crying. And she claimed it took no effort or will to hold him as he wept, as he raped her. She just stared into his eyes lovingly the entire time. She stared where he left her all day in the gravel, weeping and giving thanks to her religious principles. She wept out of gratitude, she says. Well, I don't mind telling you, I'd begun to cry at the story's climax. Not loudly, but I did. She had learned more about love that day with a sex offender than in any other stage of her spiritual journey. And I realized in that moment I had never loved anyone before. She had addressed this psychotic's core weakness, the terror of a soul-exposing connection with another human being. Nor is any of this all that different from the man sizing up an attractive girl at a concert and pushing all the right buttons to induce her to come home with him, and lighting her cigarette and engaging in an hour of post-coital chit-chat, seemingly very intent to close. But what he really wants to do is give her a special disconnected telephone number and never contact her again. And that the reason for this cold and victimizing behavior is that the very connection that he had worked so hard to make her feel terrifies him. You see how open I'm being with you here? Well, I know I'm not telling you anything you haven't already decided that you know. I can see you forming judgments with that chilly smile. You're not the only one who can read people, you know. And you know what? It's because of her influence that I'm more sad for you than pissed off. Because the impact of this story was profound. And I'm not even going to begin to describe it to you. Can you imagine how any of this felt? To look at her sandals across the room, on the floor, and remember what you had thought of them only a few hours before. And I'd say her name and she'd say, "What?" And I'd say her name again. Well, I'm not embarrassed. I don't care how this sounds to you. I mean, I can see how I could not just let her go after this. I just grabbed on her skirt. I begged her not to leave. And then I watched her gently close the door and walk off barefoot down the hall, and never seeing her again. But it didn't matter that she was fluffy or not terribly bright. Nothing else mattered. She had all my attention. I'd fallen in love with her. I believed that she could save me. Well, I'm aware of how this all sounds. I can see that look on your face. And I know you. I know what you're thinking. So ask it. Ask it now. This is your chance. I believe she could save me, I said. Ask it now. Say something. I stand here naked before you. Judge me, you bitch. You happy now? You all worn out? Well, be happy because I don't care. I knew she could. And I knew I loved. End of story.